I think it's so valuable for us to know who's in this community. I love that we've got such a great representation between St. Louis and Denver, and also Cabanne's team. This is fantastic. So thank you guys so much for being here and joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kate Wigman. I am the COO of Rise Collaborative. I am home-based in St. Louis, but once I make my way back and forth between Denver and St. Louis, and look forward to getting out to Denver again soon, once it is safe to do so. It is a real honor and pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for today. Cabanne Howard is the CEO of Kaleidoscope Management Group. She's also a Rise Collaborative member and just an all-around incredible human being, woman, mother, mentor, and friend. Not to mention a very skilled strategist, and we are all in for a real treat to hear from her today about how to communicate during crisis.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm opening up the chat because I want to put in here, I'm going to start the chat. Thank you. If I had a little tear emoji, I'd put it in there too, but I am so grateful for the opportunity. Kate, thank you for that sweet introduction. And I'm just as you noted, proud member of Rise. I love women business owners coming together for good, and whether that be helping each other with networking or helping each other move into new phases of our career, the opportunities for collaboration between women, I feel, are endless. And so having our satellite office with Rise has been wonderful for our company. We're actually based in St. Louis, Missouri. We have our main headquarters are in the Cortex district. So for those of you in Denver, I'm sure you have co-working spaces that are similar, but Cortex is a great place for our company, and I can't wait to get back there here in a few weeks. But we have all been actively working remotely with strategic communications. And I would just say at a high level, 5 years ago, I founded the company because I saw a need in the marketplace for a strategic marketing partner that really valued relationships above all else. And we're great marketers, but we're as much problem solvers. Some of our clients have called us their thunder blanket. Back to the furry friend that's on the call, you'll understand the value of a thunder blanket. And so we try to solve our clients' problems. And sometimes that's through a suite of communication services we offer, and sometimes it's just one. So you all met Gina Feldman earlier. She works for a liquor distributor that's a $400 million company, and we are their extension of their marketing department. And so while we handle their social media management, we don't do everything for them marketing wise, but we do media relations and social media management, things that are specific to their business challenges. So we'll talk a little bit about how and examples of where we've been able to help clients, but it's such a joy to be with you. The last 6 weeks, as I'm sure for all of you, have been fast and furious, a bit of a breakneck pace. But I always say I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that we have that breakneck pace, because the alternative would be our phones not ringing and us not having jobs to go back to. So I consider myself a tired, hardworking mom who's grateful. I'm grateful for the work, and we have had a chance in the last 6 weeks, I think, to even cement some of our relationships with our clients because of the crisis. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, because I think there's actually a way in crisis communications to further embed yourself and to further the value that you provide to your key stakeholders when the going gets tough. I think it's somewhat easy to provide marketing and communications when it's all positive, but if you can actually rise to the occasion when it's tough times, I think your clients will view you as even more indispensable and more invaluable in the future. At least that's the goal. So I will get to the content that you have all joined us today to be part of. I will say, just from a housekeeping standpoint, I would love for you guys to drop stuff in the chat. I feel like one of the things that will make this a very robust discussion is not me just being a talking head. So I didn't want to do this if it weren't going to be a discussion and a two-way conversation. So Kate promised me that the format can be very interactive. And so when she said that, I agreed to participate. So if you can find the chat, feel free to drop it in there. And then we did leave time at the end for questions, hopefully for those of you who can stay on. we'll be able to open it up. We even have a little bit of scenario planning because I think some of what you all bring would be really great kind of little mini case studies for us to troubleshoot even on today's call. So maybe you can forward the deck. I don't know, I'm pressing escape, Kate, but thank you. It's not moving. So there we go. Girls helping girls. There we go. It's already an example right out of the gate. So I started with this slide because I feel like it well captures in one image how it can feel, whether you're the client with the sharks circling or whether you're the marketing agency trying to help your clients navigate these very, very choppy waters. And so the experience we're going to be highlighting today is the pandemic, but I lived through in 2008, as I'm sure many on the call have, a different type of crisis. And so I'm using a lot of the tools in my toolbox that I had available or had to go find in 2008 when I was part of founding a luxury jewelry company, one of a kind handmade goods from around the world. We did 2 million in sales in our first year. We were going gangbusters in 2006 and 2007. We had 70 sales reps all around the country. And in 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, we had to scramble and scramble very quickly. And this kind of reminds me, this image of how we felt at that time. And it has some similar parallels to how we felt, you know, in the week of March 16th of this year, when we were trying to navigate the choppy waters. So I share the 2008 story because I feel that we need to think about crisis communications on a spectrum. And so everything I'm going to be sharing today is really a blend of things I have both learned along the way and others have shared with me. And then some of it is just straight road tested. You know, we had to try some things and we learned along the way, and sometimes things worked and sometimes we had to pivot. And so sharks were circling both in 2008 and then also just the last 6 weeks. So the week of March 16th, I will just share my own personal story. We have anywhere between 10 and 15 clients. Again, I said we started the company 5 years ago. We have anywhere between 10 and 15 clients at any given time. And what's nice about marketing communications consultancy, one of the things I learned in '08 was get out of the retail business. So I am lucky in this crisis that I had learned nothing else but that I needed to make a move. So I left the retail industry. That was the good move. But I'm in a services business now. And in the week of March 16th, I will tell you, normally we can shoulder 10 to 15 clients because it's a very kind of cyclical when our clients need us. They don't all need us on the same day. So one of the things I learned the week of the March 16th, when the crisis really came to a head in the United States, I have a lot of real estate business. And so normally they need us on an ongoing basis. We've got a schedule, we've got social media calendars, we're a planning organization. Well, what do you do in communications when all of a sudden the planning, the schedules, the playbook, they all go out the window? And so one of the things that I learned, number one, and I thought this quote put it perfectly from an executive at a reputation management and consulting firm, was that managing these incidents is a full contact sport. So marketing and communication support is always full contact. You met some of the team members who are on today's call. You met one of our clients. I think all of them are probably virtually nodding because we know that we're always at the ready. We support our clients in real time all the time. But the week of the March 16th crisis, they needed us all at the very same minute, and their level of urgency was like up here. And so for me, one of the things, and there we go. Okay, I can click now. Cool. So one of the things that I came up with just in advance of this discussion was how can I frame up some of the learnings? And I tried to come up, because I'm a communicator, with somewhat of an alliteration, a way to remember what we need to do when a crisis, even not of this magnitude, God willing, we won't have one in our lifetime that's of this magnitude, but even on a smaller scale, what are the 3 C's of crisis communication? And I came up with my team's help, because they were all drawing on their experience of this crisis and how we responded. Number 1 is calm. Number 2 is consistent. And number 3 is creative. And I'll go into some of those and some examples that I would use to highlight why those 3 really rose to the top. Again, we're communicators, so we came up with a few more because we couldn't stop. But we felt like of the 6, we felt like those 3 really warranted the inclusion in the 3 C's. You see at the bottom, clear, concise, and compassionate kind of made tier 2 of our C's for crisis communication. But I would start by calm. So the week of March 16th, I'll just continue to use that as my own personal reference, is we were getting calls, and then I was making outbound calls to clients to really start to shore up, will my company make it through this? So firstly, I was thinking about my own team, and then at a very, close second, if not equal level, I was thinking about my clients and whether they were going to make it. And so there was just this very interesting dynamic between me trying to keep our team intact and then also talk to clients about what they were experiencing. So I remained calm, and I would say that of all things I was able to achieve that week in particular, maintaining calm, whether in conversations with clients. I received one call from a hospitality client. I could tell they felt so anxious, they were so nervous, and they said, we know our contract extends through December, but we're going to have to just run for the hills. We don't know if we're going to be able to keep our hotel open. I hate to do this, but I didn't want to use your services this month and then ultimately not be able to pay you at the end of the month. So instead of having like my own panic, I really kept a very cool head and just told them, hey, listen, we'll be here for you. If you need some social media posts, if you need to do a little bit of media outreach, if there's anything we can do to support you, we want to do that. And let's just kind of sidebar the contract for now. Everyone was in triage and emergency mode. And I still get a little bit of the chills at that time, because don't think I wasn't in the back of my mind going, oh my gosh, okay, who would have to be laid off if this business goes away? So there's just this interesting dynamic during crisis communications as a communicator of thinking of your own company's well-being, but then also making sure that you're representing your main stakeholders and your clients and their well-being in an effective manner. I'm happy to say that maintaining calm and telling them that we're going to be there for them, even when we knew they probably won't be able to pay us, they've since now 8 weeks later come back and are ready to re-engage. And so that's a source of really great pride for us. And I feel like somewhere in the recesses of my brain, I knew we'd come out of this. And so maintaining calm instead of like saying, okay, thanks, bye, gotta go, and try to shore up my own stuff, wouldn't have really been the right decision. And so maintaining calm in the face of a crisis, no matter what the context, that's just one micro example. I'm sure you can think of, 10 in your own life where it's not easy to maintain calm, but if you can, it's actually a very good best practice. And we can talk about that a little later. Consistent. So we started communicating. I'll use the real estate client as an example. One of my colleagues is on the webinar today who really the week of the 16th also jumped into action mode. So maintain calm, and then at the same time, spark up into action, but very disciplined action. So to the participant who's in real estate, I will say that we actually, we were able to deploy communications across all the centers. One of our clients in particular has about 4 to 6 retail centers around the country, and they needed to tell them a lot in very short order. And so being able to communicate right out of the gates with imperfect information, right? A lot of times in crisis, we don't have nearly perfect information, right? So we're watching live press conferences with Pritzker in the state of Illinois. We're looking at what Parsons is saying in Missouri, and then we're coming around the table and we're saying, okay, how can we make the most informed recommendation to our client about what to say to their most prized key stakeholders who are also really in a very state of anxious and worry. We were able to roll out communications. But what I would say about consistent and why this made it into tier 1 of 3 C's is it's not enough to do it once. Am I right, Amelia? I'm looking at Amelia because it's like, we couldn't just blow out one big week's worth of communications, which quite frankly, we were exhausted by the first rollout. So we would have all liked to take a long nap. But what I noticed was the importance of consistent communication. And so that really, I think, has positioned us well with our clients because they also wanted to go take a nap. These real estate developers and owners and leasing companies were just getting a barrage of emails, literally 10 a day saying, I'm closing, I'm closing, I'm closing. Can you imagine? So large retailers as big as Crate and Barrel, Soft Surroundings, you name it. I still get the chills because, their whole world was basically unraveling. Now, real estate is a very extreme example. I look at Gina, the calls I was getting from a company like a liquor distributor on the same day, back again to last slide, we were hearing from clients, from 6 in the morning till 10 at night with different challenges and different, oh, I should put that as a C, Amanda, customization, but that's for later. So we were customizing this crisis communications for the industry and for where the health of the company was. Every time my phone rang, I thought, oh no, Centene, are they calling because they're going to have to cancel our contract? And in their case, they were like, we are busier than ever. We're going to need to double down on you guys. And then major brands wanted to give away $100,000 for a fund to help support restaurant workers because, you know, people were buying liquor in unprecedented volume. And so I think this idea of calm, consistent, and now I'm saying customization, but then also creative. So we're lucky. We say all the time at Kaleidoscope that we've got a very specific client that we look for, and never has that been more relevant than this crisis. They're visionary, they're collaborative, and they're growth oriented. And so knowing who your customer is, or I would say in the case of those of you who talk to your clients, knowing who your clients' customers are is so important. Our clients want to be creative. And I'm very happy to say that because in crisis, if you're just putting out boilerplate, you know, bobblehead corporate speak, no one will listen to that. So I think that creative seems like maybe not a thing to do when we're in crisis because we just have to be brass tacks, buckle down. What do people talk about? Hunkering down. This is true. However, I think that there are definitely times in which we have seen, in the case of major brands, I'll just shout you out again, Gina, the idea that, you know, their sales are booming, but they're not just going to sit by and ring the register. They saw the need in the market to support people like restaurants who sell their alcohol, who are really hurting. And so we were able to, with a swift press release and, you know, a little bit of brainstorming, come up with a creative communication solutions, even amidst a very, very difficult landscape. And we got so much positive feedback about that, as opposed to, you know, we believe in the health of all of our people and safety is of most importance. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I got one more email from TaskRabbit to my dry cleaner to my coffee shop, it was like one big series of the same email over and over. And so being creative in crisis, it's kind of counterintuitive, but I definitely think tier one of the 3 C's has to be something to do with creativity. And that doesn't have to be, you know, fancy ad campaigns, but you can be very creative even just in the way that you're wording your emails. And back again to the C of customization, customizing them to the kind of customers and the kind of stakeholders that your particular clients are interested in reaching. And then I just like this. This was also in that Harvard Business Review article from this month's issue. Communication requires humans, not just bots, who can show empathy and resolve the issue in real time. I just love this because I think the world had been becoming so much about automation and AI and bots. And while I think there's a place for that, this showed us in spades how, back again to the calendars, we had things planned out the wazoo. We had to scrap everything. And so being able to pivot quickly, and think about the large brands, Coca-Cola, having to pull big ad campaigns. You can't be rolling an ad that's humorous and talking about people hugging or things like that, that would be perceived as totally tone deaf in a crisis. And so are you positioned, and are your clients positioned to actually make quick moves? Not that we need to always plan around, you know, the possibility of a pandemic, but I think this really did show the value of being positioned to move on a dime if you need to. We have something in the chat that I want to make sure I at least take a quick look at. Oh, Ashley, you're the bomb. Thanks. So I think that without being able to pivot, you end up finding yourself in some quicksand, and especially the larger companies, it's a lot harder to move on a dime. And so we saw that, you know, I spoke again to the fact that we have companies as large as, you know, Centene, $63 billion company, down to, I heard someone earlier in the intros, technology consulting firm, that we do a lot of their email marketing. And so now we've been spending a lot of energy crafting, you know, really meaningful email campaigns around how much people are on their mobile. You know, what should we be working on for them that is specifically targeted to what people might be thinking about and spending money on? Whereas stuff that they used to sell before, people aren't really making budget for, but mobile technology, maybe, because we're starting to see that that's a place where people are going to be spending an inordinate amount of time. So calm, consistent, creative, and then in the footer, be clear. I thought that was sort of obvious, but sometimes we need to say it anyway. You know, try not to overword things. I tell my team all the time, if we can put something on a word diet, we should. And ask yourself, you know, are there words that can be taken out of this? Because people are completely overwhelmed. I mean, our visual saturation is at a highest I think it's ever been. And so it's even more incumbent upon us as communicators to say just the essentials in order to cut through all that clutter. Concise, that speaks to that as well. And then compassionate. I've got an example I think here coming up. Will you forward me one ahead? either Amanda or Kate. Compassionate, I think, speaks to this idea of empathy. You know, empathy is so important in communications. And I think that one of the things that a lot of communicators fail to remember is that the person on the other end of this is ultimately, I'm going to stop share just so you guys can see if we can forward our deck. Is that people on the other side of this are humans. And so thinking of what they want to read, what they want to hear, what's going to make them feel comfortable, I think is always really important. And so compassion sometimes gets lost. And I feel like we need to speak to that. So we're back, yay, no technical glitch that we can't overcome. Communication do's and don'ts. I thought maybe just simplifying, again, our company's tagline is bringing the complex into focus. And so while some of this may be obvious or intuitive, I still thought it bears repeating. What we found in our communication is to be honest. So we brought together centers from around the country. Amelia and I still have gray hair from doing this, but within about 5 days of recognizing the severity of this crisis and that malls were going to be completely shuttered and that entire centers would be, you know, lights out for the foreseeable future, we brought together tenants from around the country on virtual webinars with the owners of these centers. And I swear, I think the thing we got the most credit for was honesty. You know, he got on there and he said, I got the chills again just now saying it. He said, there is light at the tunnel. We just don't know where the light is, but there is light. So how do you find that right crisis communication sentiment that doesn't sound like all gloom and doom, but that says, I don't have all the answers. We are equally as invested in listening to lawmakers, tuning in every day to hear what our governors are doing, but here's what we do know. And I think instead of just waiting for perfect information, which believe me, part of me was like, how are we going to host a webinar? We don't even know everything yet. But then it's like, okay, let's put it out there. We'll get on the phone with these people. And they were so appreciative. You had little business owners that run cupcake shops that were thinking to themselves, I'm already, you know, in debt. What's this going to do to me? And so getting everyone on there, I will still remember, Amelia, I'm sure you will too, seeing these faces. And then by the end, hearing people say, no, I just really appreciate this. And so it wasn't like we got on there and had a silver bullet, but communicating alone was enough for them. And I just think that's a really great takeaway in crisis. Be timely. So we didn't wait 2 weeks to reach out. We were on it. We told them that we were going to schedule this. Believe me, we spent the next week figuring out what to say, but we at least said something and then told them that we'd be talking to them in the next 5 days. So giving ourselves a little wiggle room to not be disorganized, and there is a fine line, but then also taking the time to prepare something to share with them, I thought was important. And then do your research. I think this is important because a lot of times we may have imperfect information, but get out there and Google. I mean, what did we do in communications before we had the internet? We now can find out what New York has going on. You know, we have the benefit, at least in the Midwest. Denver, I think you guys were a little bit ahead of us in terms of where we were looking to the coasts to see what we could anticipate coming to the Midwest. And so what research, whether it's in a pandemic or let's say, you know, you represent a telecommunications firm and they had a breach. I mean, what can we do to use the resources at our disposal to better communicate? And I think research is a huge component of that, so that when you write or when you present your communication, it's credible and it's not based in some type of, you know, thing that we maybe had to think up, because there's actually a lot out there that we can go get and reference and link to. And we're doing that all the time around reopening. I mean, we're not making the rules. We're just helping our clients and then their key stakeholders get to the information, not necessarily always having to write the information from scratch. And I think that in the time that, you know, I've been in this business, that's been a really important takeaway. Link to it, source it, share a link to a video of a physician that's, you know, credible on a subject. We don't have to know everything. And I think there's real power in that. Don't overcomplicate. My team will know that this is number one on the don'ts. I think so often we want to say it all and we just try to jam so much in that by the end, no one knows what the heck we were trying to say. So try to avoid overcomplication at all costs. And I think that you will see so much benefit in that, and you will get your message across, or your clients or your other stakeholders will get your message across so much more effectively. I spoke to this earlier when we talked about compassion and authenticity and communication. Do not hide behind corporate speak. in my previous life, I worked at a Fortune 500 energy company, and it used to frustrate me because they were publicly traded, they have shareholders, and I think that's kind of like code for talk in robotic language. And so I was always trying at that company when I was in communications to bring it down to real language. And I understand that there are some corporate voices that need to be maintained, but even within that, is there a way for you to help your clients, boil that down a little bit more and try and be human? So if you read a sentence and it feels like a robot, it probably is going to be perceived that way. And maybe think about ways you could tweak it while still staying in the voice. And I work with my team a lot on that. It's not casual, I'm not trying to claim that we need to talk to them like they're our best friends, but how do you strike that fine line between still being highly professional but not robotic? And I think that's a really interesting topic. And the more we get outside and on the other side of this pandemic, I think there'll be a lot learned through this process about how you can communicate with heart, even in crisis. And then don't rush to respond unless you have your message down. I was very tempted in a couple of cases to just like spit something out. And I shared on my LinkedIn. Maybe we can all link after this and you can see the article. I didn't link to it here. And we have a resources slide at the end. Amanda, maybe we can pop that in there. It was very tempting, like the week of March 16th. I feel like, I don't know if you guys had this, but like that week, I felt like I just kept wanting to say and do and share and be. But I found this really neat article that talked about kind of trying to find that balance between just rushing to talk and rushing to send something out and actually being thoughtful. And so I think you'll be increasingly perceived by your clients and key stakeholders as thoughtful if you can strike that right balance between I've thought about it, we're ready to talk now, as opposed to just saying what you're thinking right out of the gates. And so don't rush to respond unless you've gotten that message down. And that comes in many shapes, and you're probably consulting other people to get that message down, which is the right thing to do. I'm going to escape us again because it just does not want to let, nope, there we go. So this is the fun part. I've talked a lot and it's already 1:33, and I think we're going to lose a few people at 1:45 perhaps. So I would love to just kind of tee this scenario up and then let you guys either drop in the chat or we can take ourselves off of mute. It's not such a big group that I think we need to, referee that too much, but I think that it would be fun to think of a time when you successfully responded in crisis, either this crisis or something in the past. And I like this example. I thought this was a great one. Sometimes it helps to jog our memories when we think of an example. So when Panera took French onion soup off the menu, its brand community was up in arms, and they tweeted immediately when they started to see on social that this was just like a complete French onion soup firestorm. This is a small example. I tried to go light because it's all been so heavy about death and destruction. The chain tweeted that the soup wouldn't be gone forever and offered a timeline for its return. That seems basic. Okay, I think that every company should probably have known to do that. But then they were able to, when they brought it back, turn it into an ad campaign, introducing the item with this cute video where an actress that played Phyllis from The Office was reading aloud some of the most negative tweets and then provided levity, making the community feel heard and empowered. How cute is that? And I think it shows that they don't take themselves too seriously. They have a bit of a sense of humor and were willing to acknowledge that they probably yanked it without much communication. And I think that it was a really positive example of how to respond in a crisis. If you can consider the French onion debacle a crisis, that's probably negotiable. And then a time when a crisis, maybe you would have responded differently. So we can just share a few examples of these among this group. I'm excited to hear what other people have experienced. And I think we could all, if you were, not living under a rock last year, you probably heard about the Peloton ad campaign where the hubby or the partner gave his partner the Peloton. And many saw this online as sexist and classist and like he was trying to help her lose weight or whatever. There were a lot of reasons why people thought that ad campaign was misguided. And instead of just owning it and maybe kind of like recognizing that they missed the mark, the firm issued a press release saying how disappointed they were that people had misinterpreted them. So still kind of not owning it. And I think that really does speak to compassion and authenticity, how they actually created more trouble for themselves by, not owning it. And I think there are plenty of brands, Uber, I could name a lot that I think probably looking back would have said, we could have probably done better. But when you're in it, how hard is it to really see, kind of the 10,000 foot view? So I would just let Kate maybe tell me if there's anything in the chat, or if we want to take a couple people off mute and just maybe share a little about either example, the good or the, oh man, if I had done it differently, I would have done it like this.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, feel free to pull yourself off. Julie, I know not to call on you, but especially with your experience in crisis and just what a skilled strategist and communicator you are, I'm wondering who comes to mind for you.
You know, I think Peloton is a good, and I'm actually kind of a hardcore Peloton enthusiast, so I paid a lot of attention to that one. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, you know, the worst thing you can do is get defensive, which is kind of what I felt like they did, right? And so, and it is, you know, to Cabanne's point, hard not to do that sometimes, particularly in the heat of the moment, which is why I think it's great advice to not feel like you need to be in a rush to respond, right? Like, you know, I think it makes it makes good sense to really, you know, spend some time really getting your message clear and really thinking about how that's going to land and kind of test it with different, you know, groups or stakeholders to make sure that, you know, you're going to have the response that you want to have, not, you know, not a response that you may regret. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, when I used to have to deal with this stuff a lot, I don't know that we had any examples of, I mean, there were probably plenty of examples where things weren't done as well as they could be, but I don't know, I don't have a specific one in mind. I'm just kind of going back in my past and thinking about it's given me stress just thinking about all the stuff that we had to communicate, you know, that was really hard stuff, right? And ours was mostly internal stuff, but still, you know, I mean, just realizing, you know, what mental state your audience is in, you know, I think is really important, right? And making sure that you respond to that.
That's a great example. And I think, you know, I didn't overtly state this, but I love that you called that out because, you know, Gina and I work a lot together on communication externally, but also internally. And so I think a lot of these principles, it may go without saying, but they really do apply if you're trying to communicate effectively to your own employees, as well as to consumers, general population, external audiences. And I think that there's real power in that. It's not like these are just specifically principles for communicating to this audience. I think they apply pretty broadly.
Yeah, well, and I think, you know, it's an interesting time. You know, I've had this conversation actually in a mastermind group that I'm in that's associated with RISE, you know, people who have employees, you know, who have a lot of fear during this time. And then others who have employees who are kind of overconfident maybe about, you know, how the company is going to pull out of, you know, the current situation, right? And so, you know, just thinking about, you know, what the emotional state is of the people you're communicating with and really taking that in, you know, into mind as you develop how you're going to communicate.
That's a great point. I talked about having imperfect information earlier, and I think there's no less perfect communications element than trying to talk to a workforce that you have absolutely no idea what the 6-month horizon looks like. And so when you're writing things to employees that say, we're in this together, you can never say things like your job is secure for the long term. So I think employee communications could be its own webinar, just because you want to keep your employees engaged, you know, feeling valued, high morale, while also being very realistic. And I think that's a really important thing for any company that's trying to navigate crisis communications with their employees, because there's fewer things more complex in this environment than that.
Yeah, you know, that actually brings up an example that I do think it was an example where I would have handled it differently. And it's actually my husband's company, his parent company. I mean, they put out a pretty bold statement that there would be no layoffs and no impact to their employees, you know, for the next year or whatever, right? And I just thought, wow, that's a pretty, I mean, I understand they want to quell fears, but to me, speculation like that is a really slippery slope. You know, they have no idea. A year is a pretty long timeline to try to anticipate, you know, what may or may not happen in there. And I thought, man, if they have to eat their words on that,
right.
really be
It
right.
must have really made a conscious decision to be bold. And that's actually probably like shock value. We're going to tell everybody that, but you better have some deep reserves and some serious commitment, because it could totally backfire. Like you said, if they say it, they're heroes for, 6 months and then they have to go back on it. So making sure that when you do make bold statements that kind of send shockwaves and they go, wow, that's so cool, that you can actually back it up. That's a great point. Anyone else, ideas of things where you would share with the group, you either knocked it out of the park or would have changed the way that you rolled something out?
I have an example, Cavanne, and it could be something that you advised our CEO of major brands to do or approach it in this way. But when we were all, advised of our new ways of working in mid-March, our CEO, she's a woman. She is doing it single-handedly. She's a widow. Her story really is pretty amazing. But two things that stuck out to me, she didn't say, here's the exact plan, and this is exactly, what we're going to do. She said, I'm putting you first and your safety first. I don't have all the answers, but I assure you, we're gonna figure this out together. And her communication really hasn't changed since then. She's advised us of her plan, to keep everybody, our safety first. But it's like, hey, I don't know the answers. The environment is changing hourly sometimes. And so her humility in that, when we look to her, a lot of the time to have the answers and to have the direction, to simply say, I don't know exactly what tomorrow's going to look like, but you are my top priority, and that's how we're going to move forward. So she had that strategy in place with her communication. But the thing I also loved was this in it together idea, is that, throughout the quarantine, she sent out like her favorite chocolate chip recipe, to everybody. And that might be a small thing, but it was also like, she's human, she's home maybe by herself, and she cares about us. And it went a long way.
That's a great example. She and I did talk about that. She's an excellent communicator in her own right, but we bounced some ideas off of each other for sure. And I loved her approach. Humility. She definitely maintained calm. We were fortunate because, the liquor industry did see a lot of increase. However, we sell to restaurants. So she had her own pain points that she was navigating in terms of a dip in revenue, hopefully making it up on some of the grocery sales. But I loved how she approached it. And major brands had real skin in the game, because a lot of our folks had to go on site to grocers. And so this idea of, we are putting you first, and yet there are still parts of your job that will require you to be out in the world, and we thank you for that. And so I just thought you're right to bring her up. She's a great leader, and I think she showed that through her communications, chocolate chip cookie recipes and all. Super cool. I like that example. Thanks, Gina. I'm thinking if anyone else has a good or a bad. We also wanted to, I'll see what will you go? There we go. We're going to move into Q&A anyway. We're already at 1:45, so we could probably blend this part of our presentation just to kind of say, was there anything that we talked about? I tried to keep it pretty tight and concise and not try to boil the ocean on a 40-minute discussion, but are there things that you would like to have learned more or hear more about that we didn't cover? Because we can also address questions too. Amanda,
I can say when I thought about things that didn't go well, certainly things that come to mind for me are celebrities and politicians. So I often I was just thinking about things that to seem either could have been so, or I think maybe they speak before they think, oftentimes too. And so I think that was really important what you mentioned too about, it's like, yes, be timely, yes, acknowledge it, but also taking thinking through your response as opposed to just saying the first thing that comes to your mind, because
That
sometimes
is
you can end up
so
creating.
funny. Oh, I love that you brought that up. Okay, so before this presentation, Amanda and I were brainstorming. I said, what if I could do on the do's and don'ts slide, like a don't be like this and do be like that? And we had some fun because we're like, is like Steve Harvey don't, or Paula Dean don't. But then I thought, I haven't talked to this audience before. Maybe there are some fans in the audience, but I think that celebrities and politicians are great examples on a much larger stage of things that you can do to earn favor and people's trust and respect in communication versus breaking the internet and not in a good way. So those are great examples. I don't know if anyone has other ones, but I feel like in this crisis, John Krasinski, probably stands out to me, doing the Find the Good campaign. So many of our clients said to us, gosh, that's so neat. And we've done similar kind of Find the Good in each community where they operate. And I just think there's some lessons from him for sure in the celebrity realm. Anyone else that you guys can think of that you feel like is particularly like handled it beautifully? Our president probably needed to be on this luncheon.
Okay, I'm going to add one, and I'm so sorry, my video is so weird in this room. But one that might be good, or I would love your opinion on, is Ellen DeGeneres. She has been catching so much slack right now, and I had been reading a few things that where she thought that, some of the negative comments about her were just kind of, whispers in the wind, but a lot of them have been really building up, especially with like her former bodyguard speaking out against her. And, I feel like she's one of those people that really needs to get on top of this negative coverage, but everybody loves Ellen. Her ratings, like nothing's hurting that. I mean, I can say that for myself. I love her show, but I think she's a good one, to talk about. But I do think in this crisis, it's exactly what you say. You have to watch what you say, because she's in this, $25 million mansion. And she said being at home feels like, being stuck in jail.
Wow.
For most Americans.
I think we would. With Ellen, so I was going to hope you were going to tell me what she was getting slack for. So acting like it's really tough to be her in that. And then what did the bodyguard say?
Oh, sorry.
If anyone else has seen the fallout with Ellen, you can tell us. But what was the claim against her from her bodyguard, Lise?
Oh, I think he said she was the coldest human being and dehumanizing. I think those.
Wow. Okay, yeah, she needs to get in front of that for sure, or on the back of that, I guess.
Yeah, it was her former. They were very bold. Like what I read was short, but it was a direct quote. And I know dehumanizing was one of them, but like.
You know what you're bringing up that I think is a really important point, and we didn't, have enough time to contemplate it here, but I think it's something to consider, is the universality of the quarantine has made this crisis communication so interesting, because we're all kind of saying similarly the same thing, like we care about people's health, we're going to get them back. In the case of your example, or even the Steve Harvey or these other examples that we're highlighting that are celebs or politicians, it's almost like it's their own personal crisis, right? They've said something and they've set off their own firestorm, versus I think the universality of this whole quarantine has made the crisis communications on one hand complex, but we're also all navigating a similar water of how do we speak about our business in this difficult time. But there are a lot of message points and things that we're all kind of dancing around that are similar. In the case of Ellen, I think if I were her marketing partner, if I were her marketing agency, I think whenever things like that happen, I actually saw one recently that has a similar angle to it, where someone who's a food author and blogger said something very negative about two other females, Marie Kondo, and the way she's kind of monetized her fame, and that she would never do that. And then also gave some slack to Chrissy Teigen for how she's kind of like written one cookbook, now has a Target line. And I think as a phone call of women business leaders, it's an interesting one, because she's now had to come out with this, like enormous apology. She said she's tried to write Chrissy an email. I hope you got my email, but I thought I would put it here too. This idea that you have to own it. I think if it is in the case of Ellen, I don't know enough to speak intelligently beyond just, I think she should definitely acknowledge and own it. But I think not being defensive. Someone said earlier, I think who was that? Was that Julie? Julie, you said, the defensiveness, I don't think there's ever really in crisis communications much benefit to being defensive, because it kind of comes back to how perception's everything. Because if I'm Ellen, on one hand, I could say, well, my life is so hard because I put myself on this public stage and people judge me and there's all these internet trolls. But like you said, Lisa, at some point, if enough people are having a feeling or noticing or, sharing a sentiment, maybe there's a little bit of truth in it. And so the concept of celebrity and crisis communication around them is very nuanced, because it's how they make their money is the support of their fans. But then they also are in a position where if everybody starts to gang up on them, I could see how it could be extremely hurtful, because it's in stereo. So yeah, that's interesting.
One other thought, Cabanne, too. One of the C's that you brought up was consistency, and it does make me think sometimes, like, you can tell when a crisis is happening for a company or an individual. There's a party line that's been developed, and it's okay. This is what anyone in the organization or whoever's a spokesperson. This is what we're going to say, and then sometimes that gets. People get pressed on it, and then they just end up becoming a broken record because they're just saying the same thing. So sort of walking that line between, okay, I want to be authentic, but then also we have crafted this careful message and we know it's important to stay online. And not that there's answers to that, but in thinking about being in crisis, like, is it smart to create multiple party lines, so to speak, or multiple messages so that no one's sounding like a total robot or inauthentic?
That's a great question, Kate. I feel like if we still had our lawyer on the phone, I'm not sure if you are still on the call, but we need to hear from maybe Sherry, because I think that while consistent is important, you have to always balance it with the creative. So are you showing people that you're actually thinking creatively about how you're responding, or are you just spitting out the party line? And a lot of times with the $60+ billion company that has shareholders and, one comment taken out of context could actually negatively affect their share price. I get it. You can't have executives wandering around rogue saying funny things or, being glib about their answers. So I don't know if Sherry has a perspective on it, but I know that a lot of times we do have to be very cognizant of the way we describe difficult or toxic or crisis related issues, because they could ultimately end up in print, in a lawsuit. There's real significance to that. So anyone who says marketing communications is not business critical or is, kind of like a soft function, I highly disagree, because the way you talk and the way you position things actually could have really material business impact. I see Sherry nodding. Maybe she just agrees. That's cool too. Oh wait, you're on mute.
Oh, I agree. I'm not I went to law school, but I'm not a lawyer. I didn't finish, but I'm a CPA, and I uncovered fraud very early in my 20s. For instance, the Chicago Board of Education, I had to, as a 20-something-year-old, communicate that, in this huge swarm of media. And you have to be very careful. I worked for Arthur Andersen, and so it was just interesting the way we even saw that being communicated. Then I'm looking at, walking some women through divorce since my own divorce and being interested in that financial aspect of it. But I had a CFO husband as well when I was married for 10 years. And so there was all that. He was, on talking on Wall Street, whatever. And so I watched him, and I've actually worked at a big corporation, and I watched that sort of, you have to be careful what you say sort of thing. How it's said, but also it does feel very robotic at times. So
it does, right? How do you strike the line between, creative and sounding original while also not getting yourself into, a legal mess? I think that's a really important thing, especially for communicators that support large enterprises. I would say a lot of CEOs of large enterprises, while they would like to be creative, they would much more prioritize consistency and striking the balance, erring on the side of caution. You saw caution wasn't in mine, but it's partly because I spoke to you guys about the types of clients we work with: visionary, collaborative, growth oriented. They care about, being cautious, but those others are also a priority.
A little one. On the other end of that, just want to throw this in there. When I was at Time Warner, I had to give a presentation to Ted Turner and a bunch of executives on their long range plan. and I brought in a live monkey because I was a finance person and I thought, oh, these people are also creative. But that was like a risk to them because, they don't, how is it going to look? But, so yeah, it's a constant pivot, in things, but, anyway, so that's something I was looking at.
You can give the next lecture. You presented to Ted Turner. I feel like we're going to get Sherry on the next webinar.
No. No, it was interesting. That's all I'm going to say. Because I thought, how am I going to get his attention? He's, how am I going to keep his attention? And so I had somebody bring their commercials have a live monkey on it. So I had somebody bring a live monkey in the middle of the presentation to make a point to get his attention about something. And they brought this monkey. My boss did not like it. I did not. So
awesome.
That's all I'm going to say. But
that's a different bullet point. Know your audience, right? Because the monkey trick actually sounds quite clever, but not if it's not.
They all liked it. No, everyone was like, he fostered a relationship with me, and I did very well because of that, because I took the risk.
Right.
And I knew my stuff, but my boss was uncomfortable. My immediate boss was uncomfortable with that.
Right.
But I told her in advance, but I took a risk. So, yeah.
Understandably. Yeah. And I think, that risk tolerance and communication, I think is just so back to the customization. It's so case by case. Every company just has a much different risk tolerance.
Yeah.
And I think you just have to be sensitive to that if you're helping a firm communicate.
But now I want to work with, individuals. It's like, that's a totally different thing. You have to be where they're at because there's so many people, so many emotions, and you have to put empathy first. You're so right.
That is so true. Well, I think on a micro level, so we've been talking very enterprise level throughout this conversation, but you going into practice and handling divorce law, I feel like individuals are so impulsive and we write things on social media and we put things in text. And I just think that a lot of these principles really can apply for us at an individual level too, knowing that some of these could end up in a court of law. Or I think, even though we're adults, we tell younger people all the time, be careful what you put out there because it could ultimately come back to hurt you. But I think that it's so true even of adults. And so for my team, when we write social media posts or we think about something that might on the surface seem so innocuous, sometimes I'll know something about the company and what they're trying to achieve that the team member that's writing the social post has no visibility to. So they'll write something that could have actually just been a total tinderbox, and I have to say, you know what, that sounds like a great post, but in light of this other stuff that you have no visibility to, we need to take that down and or not post it at all. And so there's just so many times where I think looking at things from multi-dimension, whether or not you're an individual that might go down the path of getting divorced, be mindful of the communication because it could end up costing you money or heartache down the line.
Absolutely. Such great insights. I am so grateful for this. Was a knock your socks off presentation. Such an impactful and so many valuable takeaways, Cabanne. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, and thank you everyone for joining too. It's always so great to have an engaged and educated and involved audience too. So thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to being a part of this conversation. I know Cabanne is such a collaborator. She's always happy to connect and would love to hear thoughts, feedback, work together.
Are you able to flip forward? I don't know if I am, but I put a little something at the end for us to stay in touch. So that's a resources deck. One more, there we go. So we'll share this deck out where we have some links to some articles that might be beneficial since we had to keep it somewhat high level for today. If there's anything else that we can provide you guys with, we're always happy to help. And thank you for saying I'm collaborative. It's what we try to do. And you also said thank you for joining. I feel like people's time is so precious, and I know everyone's invited on lots of Zoom time. So I really value and appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today. And thanks for being a great moderator, Kate.